Hey guys, the other night I went out and shot some really low light footage with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, and I just wanted to talk really quickly about how I like to expose and grade low light footage in order to get clean results with low noise. This is the main shot I really want to talk about because almost everything in the frame here, except for the gas station itself, which has these super bright fluorescent lights, everything here is into the noise floor, we'll say. When we zoom in here, you have a lot of texture going on. There's some chroma noise, it's pretty messy. So if we pop into our color processing, let's turn effects off so we can see what we're doing. Let's head into the raw settings and we can change this to clip and see what we have. So we're running Blackmagic Film Gen 5, which you can switch here for whatever reason you want to go back to 4. And this was shot at the second native ISO, the second circuit at 1250. So we're sitting above 0. We have all the information that we need basically. Nothing's peaking on either side, which is great. So what I like to do most of the time when I am working with log footage is just to use DaVinci Resolve's built-in color space transform. I find it to be non-destructive and I get good results. So we'll go in here and we'll choose Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut Gen 4 and 5. We're working with 5. And then we will change, where are you? Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. So this is our Rec 709. And it is crunchy. We are now losing a lot of detail down below. And the highlights aren't too bad. That actually looks great. But this is a little bit too, I don't know, dramatic for what I'm going for. So I'm actually going to create a node before this transform with Shift S. And now we can kind of manipulate the footage before it goes into the color space transform. A lot of people like to use primaries for these types of adjustments. I'm just used to curves. Maybe that's not even the right method to use, but I'm just used to them and I can get the results I want the fastest. What I'm doing in here with these 3 dots is hitting editable splines, because now when you grab either end here, it sort of gives you a handle that you can use to get a nice little curve built in. You don't have to put a bunch of points in. So the way that I like to treat low light footage is to do what I call a ramp. Instead of, traditionally with footage, you're doing something like this, you're getting an S curve. It's not necessarily what we want for this shot. If we identify our problems here, we want more information out of these darker parts. But if we push too much brightness back into it, then I'm gonna just turn off the color space transform. There's not a whole lot of information here that's not being destroyed by the noise floor. But I also don't want everything to be sitting at 0. We want it to be above 0. So the reason why you would use a ramp in a situation like this is to prioritize a sort of clean transition from midtones to shadows, since that's a majority of what the image is. We don't really have to worry about, we don't have to worry about highlight roll-off here at all because nothing's peaking. So we can kind of move the highlights all over the place and not worry too much about creating a natural clipping point. So I like to start off by grabbing the darkest part of the image. You can see it on the histogram here. And I'm gonna keep an eye over here on my waveform. And then maybe we'll make it sit about here to start. Now here's before and after all the adjustments. So this is the color space transform being turned off too. We're showing the noise floor for sure. This is not what we want. I want the shot to look natural, and with my own eyes while recording this, all of this stuff in here, I couldn't actually see, or at least see a lot of detail. So we kind of want to replicate that, but also having a 0 IRE jet black doesn't always feel natural because it's hard for that to exist in the world with your eyes. So I'm gonna grab this handle and we want to create an upwards ramp to create this nice little gentle adjustment from the midtones and even the highlights all the way down to the darkest point. It does so gradually the whole time. So we've pushed this down on the waveform again, and we're gonna bump that up, and then we're gonna push this. Just kind of nudge that. Now I'm gonna turn up the waveform brightness so we can really see what's happening here. These are the brightest parts. This is the gas station fluorescent lights. And actually, while we're at it, I'm gonna adjust the white balance just a bit here. So match up the red and blue, and then maybe just a tiny little bit. Maybe that's a more correct white balance. I might actually go back and make it sort of a little colder again, because a lot of times nighttime footage, I'm going for a little bit of a colder look. We'll leave the shadows here at the moment. I want to work on the highlights for a little bit. They feel a little muted to me. Really bright parts of the image, that sort of fluorescent look should punch through in the image, I think, or at least I want it to in this shot. So you could either grab this, the highest point of the curve, and sort of boost it. You can prioritize the smoothness of the ramp by creating this unbroken kind of curve here. And we'll go until we're definitely not losing any detail. You could probably push the limits and get way up here. I don't necessarily want that. Maybe we go here. And I'm constantly adjusting these handles so I can get the right curve. We'll pick that spot. So here's before and after of our curve. Getting a lot of that detail back. If we go in here, I don't know what you're gonna be able to see on YouTube after compression happens. You can still see the noise. There's before, everything, all the adjustments, and there's after. I don't think it's distracting all the time to have a little bit of noise visible in the footage, especially if it's nighttime footage. So if we pop in here and we look at the noise that actually has sort of survived our curve, and at this point, I'm liking this contrast curve. If you really wanted to, maybe you could pop in here and we'll unbind Luma and Chroma and maybe do like, we'll bump up spatial till about 10. We'll grab one frame and we'll hit Luma at, let's just do 10. Turn everything back on. Maybe we can disable these too, so we can see what's happening. And here's before and after this noise. It's not doing a whole lot, but it is getting rid of that chroma noise. If we add back everybody, it's a pretty clean image. For me, I would probably not denoise this unless I was going for a really clean look, but I'm just not in this case. This is me shooting out of the side of my car window, and this is not it's not a short film. I just wanted to capture this scene of these fluorescent lights on this abandoned gas station with everything dark around it. I think it's cool to draw attention to how bright the gas station is and how dark everything else is. If you're shooting some kind of dialogue scene here, you'd want to take more time to light correctly and to make sure you're not getting a bunch of noise, especially on people's faces. If you're having a dialogue scene and there's a bunch of noise on people's faces, you really don't want that. I would go and grab 3500 400T. It's my favorite preset for film grain. By the way, this was shot on a Mitacon Speedmaster 35mm T1. It's a ridiculously fast lens, but I recorded this shot at f2.8. So it's not, I wasn't opening up the lens to maximum. You can still see some of this chromatic aberration here. And another goofy thing about this lens, bright lights cause these crazy star patterns. I've never seen anything like that before. And this lens is stopped down, but not ridiculously stopped down. By the way, as I said, this is recorded with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, which is a dual native ISO camera. Basically means that you can put the ISO into a second native circuit that just makes the camera more sensitive to light, so you can record lower light images like this. When you're recording RAW, you can choose your ISO in post, but only the ISOs within that circuit that you chose. I chose the second one. The lowest one is 1250. In general, when you're getting low light footage, you really want to try and get as much light into your final image as possible without clipping your highlights. Because the higher you can get the shadow detail away from the noise floor, which is always going to exist at a certain level, the more detail you have, the more you can work with it in post. So actually, we can go over to the second shot here. This one doesn't really have any of those really, really bright highlights, but we can sort of do the same thing we did with this last shot and see what happens. So I'm going to grab this grade with option 1, pop over to this other shot.
Oh my goodness gracious.
And then we can actually paste that grade onto a second shot with Command 1. So this is all the same settings from the first grade that we did. And this one was recorded at 1250. Just for fun, let's go to 3200. I think this is a little bit too noisy, a little bit too textured. Again, there's almost no light. Just with my eyes, I could barely see this building, so we are working in very low light conditions. I'm just gonna readjust this ramp a little bit. I kind of like where the shadows are sitting. I'm gonna introduce a little bit more contrast though. So the interesting thing is that there's this light up here. If we push this too far, we're gonna blow out this window, which could be fine if you decide that's what you're going for. I don't necessarily want to do that. So I wanna protect this highest point in our ramp. I'm actually gonna put it down here, but I'm gonna grab the handle and introduce light like this. So now we kind of have an S-curve here. Keep working that down, introducing a little bit more light. Grab the bottom handle. Let's go back to full screen. Grab the bottom handle, darken the whole image. Maybe we go a little bit brighter in the shadows. So this is another way, this is another contrast curve to use when working with low light footage. Still pretty noisy. This one I might do a little bit of chroma denoising. Call it 10. Most of it's gone. This one was also recorded at T2.8. So we're not opening up the lens to its maximum. There's several more stops to get out of the lens. It kind of goes without saying, but choosing a faster lens is also a good idea. If you're using a lens that can only open up to 5.6, you're not going to have as much light as if you're using a T1. So choose lenses that are bright, let a whole bunch of light in, make sure you're careful about what ISO values you're using, and experiment with these different kinds of contrast curves. Don't just jack the contrast up always and then wonder why you can't control the high points and the low points. I like to get this fine detail control with the curve adjustment, but you could do the exact same thing with primaries. Actually, let's just do it. I'm gonna get rid of the film grain and the denoising just for performance reasons. In a sort of overly simplistic way of thinking, the curves are kind of lift, gamma, gain. So if we kind of do the same thing, all we're gonna do is lift up the darkest point and send the gamma down. And kind of work that into a lot of our detail kind of smoothly going into the bottom of the waveform, but not too far. And then you can grab your highlights. Maybe I want them to live right there. Not too bad. Try out that ramp, that sort of ramp curve. I think it's really, really useful for low light footage. I don't even limit it only to low light footage. I actually use ramps all the time because with a lot of our prosumer cameras, they're really good at capturing a lot of dynamic range and kind of like squeezing all of that highlight detail down. If you're not clipping your highlights and you have all of the information, then you don't have to worry about sort of faking like a highlight roll off because there's no highlights to roll off. So instead, focus much of the curve on making your midtones transition into the darkest part of the image as smoothly as possible. I don't think anything looks worse than an image where you have midtones that are exposed correctly. You have shadows, all the information's there. You have highlights, all the information's there. But there's like this sharp, like maybe the S curve is way too extreme. And then you don't have that gradual transition from midtones to shadows, and it's very blocky, and shadows become kind of blocky and crunchy and digital looking. Film has a wonderful way of making that gradual change already. So with our digital sensors, we want to try to replicate that as much as possible. But anyway, thanks for popping by, guys. I really appreciate you watching. I'll see you next time.